ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the I almost said the Rod of Seven Parts because Moa Peach just typed that in chat and it threw me off. Thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the Saturday Morning D&D Show. My name is Jordan with a silent PH in the middle, and I'm joined always by my wonderful co-host, Lucian over there at, or Sir Lucian over at Sir Lucian Gaming. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Welcome to, I guess, holiday weekend. A weekend for some of you people that are getting prepped for holidays.
Like Halloween?
That's the one.
Oh, okay.
Some people do lots of stuff. Like, I'm sure there's parties being planned right now, like adult and non-kid, but also maybe kid parties, or I don't know. Maybe not. They're waiting for the day.
They call them, like, have you heard of trunk or treats?
Yes, I did. During COVID, that was huge. Trunk or treat.
Oh, it was huge during COVID. That's right. We went to one, the local mortuary, which is kind of funny. They had a bunch of hearses out, and they did a trunk or treat, and
that's funny.
We went to that. That was a week ago or so with Oliver, and that was fun. But I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, trunk or treat.
Well, and I'm going to add on to that. Good job, mortuaries, because normally when we go to those, it's always sad and it's not a great thing. So to have something that's not a reason to go there, that's happy and fun, that's perfect for them. I will say, not to bring everybody down, but this past week I did have to go to one. My grandmother passed away.
Oh, so sweet.
And we went to a service at a mortuary. And I just was thinking, just as you said that, I was like, oh no, there's no fun memories there now. But if I got to go trunk or treat as a kid, maybe it wouldn't be a big deal. So maybe that's a good idea.
I don't know. I was wondering if it's not really necessarily trying to change their image, but I think it was just a fun thing to do. And then a lot of the community got on board, like the local police were there handing out stickers and candy, and a bunch of other sponsory things came in, and I think it was almost like you could rent a spot and be like, it's also kind of advertising to the adults. So,
well, super safe, right? Contained area, lots of adults there.
Oh yeah,
with their kids
like
typically have to bring
lot.
them there.
So that's
the safety issue is super huge there. I'm a kid of the 80s, which is the era of, hey, I'm going trick-or-treating, back by midnight, parents nowhere to be seen, and we live in super suburbia of Phoenix, Arizona, and we are going from neighborhood to neighborhood as fast and as hard as we can to get as big a bag of candy as possible. No supervision anywhere. Teenagers picking on kids, bullies happening, weirdos out there, strange stuff going on. Anybody could be hit by a car at that point. I mean, it's like, but kids are just out rampant, getting cotton, all kinds of candy wherever they could.
I lived in the sticks, and it was very much the same. Like, by the time I was 10, it was like, all right, bye, okay.
Yeah, my parents did not go with us trick-or-treating, which I'm just surprises me now, because I would think, why wouldn't you? Why, just, it's just a weird thing.
Our UK friend says, what is a trunk or treat? I was like, well, you probably know about Halloween trick-or-treat. A trunk or treat is when everybody brings cars to like a safe parking lot, and then there's candy in the trunk of the car. So instead of going door to door, you're going to car trunk to car trunk and getting, or the boot as they call it in other places. So
maybe that's where he was going. What's a trunk?
A boot or treat.
An elephant trunk.
That's funny. We're going to talk less about trick-or-treating and more about Dungeons and Dragons. But...
Yeah, those in chat, do you live in a place that doesn't have Halloween? Because this kind of came up a little bit with our Australian dungeon master over our game this past week, getting ahead of ourselves. And he was like, he loves absolutely the idea of Halloween and the whole thing around it. But apparently that is not a big thing in Australia at all.
No.
Or at least the place that he's at. So I was like, oh, that's a shame, because that's such a fun, like the commercial, what it's turned into version of it, of kids dressing in costumes and going out and being able to choose, like sometimes they want to be scary, sometimes they want to be a superhero, sometimes they want to be their favorite character, and then they get candy and they with their friends, and it's a great social experience. I think that version of it, they don't get that, so that's a shame. Is anybody else out there not celebrating that? Are there other,
I think Danimal and I were talking about it, and it's one of those things where sometimes, like, English speaking countries, I think we all kind of have similar holidays, as opposed, but the exception being, like, for the most part, they all celebrate Christmas. So then I think oh, we probably all celebrate, I don't know, like Halloween or something, you know. And I know like Canada has a different date of Thanksgiving than America, but it's still a harvest time of year, and we give thanks kind of a thing. But you're right. I guess Halloween's just not big over in Australia, and I don't know. And there's also probably that push of, I don't want to be America. Like, stop. You know, like we could have our own holidays or something.
Yeah, stop giving us your holidays. I could see that.
When Danimal said that, I said, man, that push to get the 4th of July over to Australia is probably going to be real hard now, huh? And he laughed. So. Thank you, BK Dan, for the birthday wishes. I'm older. I'm very excited to be older. It'll be fun. Moving on down
this tiny list that we have here.
Well, no, I was moving on down the. I don't know why I said moving on down, but I've completed more circles around the sun. Is what I was trying to say.
Oh, there you go.
And got to play some DCC for my
Wait,
birthday.
what was the big number again? I think it felt like it was a significant number, right?
40, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's a 10. It's a divided by 10 number.
It's a divided by 10 number, yeah.
Feel a difference that morning you woke up, like just overnight, 39?
Well, we always joke that I was 87 years old by the time I was 25, so...
I've already felt it.
It's like, no, he's already there. It's
Benjamin
like,
Button.
Got my special dietary things, take a load of medication every morning. That's Jordan.
You're out of there. So you haven't felt it yet. That's okay. Not to say, don't say the age, but is your wife older or younger than you?
We're the same. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
So.
All right. So oh no, you just told her age.
Oh, don't do that. Dang it. Whatever. It's just a number.
Sorry. Well, tell her sorry for reaching that too. But she made it. You're up on the top of the hill. That's the top. You may be going down after that, but you're at least at the top. You know, that's the
we do have a short list today for news. So Moa Peach just put in chat, or Mao. I'm always probably saying your name wrong. But how do you run one-shots for Halloween? So maybe I'll put that down on the notes, and we can definitely talk about
Somebody in this chat has done that several times.
Yeah.
Talked about it, too, on several shows. Although, Dungeons & Dragons, he's mostly done Kids on Bikes, but...
I have done some D&D spooky times. Usually one-shots.
I think I've done one. And it is fun. I ran The Mist on Halloween.
The Mist?
Yeah, my version of
your version of it. Okay, I was like,
Forgotten Realms. It's basically the premise of the movie The Mist, or Stephen King's story, which I also read, The Mist. And it's that story, but I put it in Forgotten Realms with my players, and I just had them roll up some like 3rd level, 4th level characters and ran it. But I'll let you. We'll get into it because it was pretty fun.
No, that sounds cool. I'm gonna add it here so we don't forget. So D&D Beyond, we're gearing up for Dragonlance, and I was reading up on Dragonlance today and yesterday, and I didn't know that it's called Dragonlance because there was the war between the dragons, basically the war between the good dragons and the bad dragons.
It's called the War of the Lance, though, too, right?
It is.
Isn't that another term?
They made a magic item called the Dragon Lance that was the key magical item that allowed to defeat the evil chromatic dragons and banish them from Krynn. And then the metallic dragons left as well to keep the balance for whatever reason, because dragons are all about, or these dragons are all about balance and good and the bad and the metallic and the chromatic. So it was like a physical thing, and so that's why it kind of became the title of the campaign series. Anyway, so we had a couple of things pop up. One was the Lunar Dragon Sorcerer preview. And I saw, I clicked the wrong button. I saw a lot of videos where people were just like, power creep, and they're acknowledging that the original sorcerer and the PHB was bad, and whoa. And, you know, take it with a grain of salt. I'm starting to think that every one of these campaign settings should kind of be thought of separately from whatever other game you're playing. Because I never heard anyone cry out that the piety system was broken from the ancient Greece setting that we have, like for Theros.
Yeah.
You know, and
Ravnica's
that
guild
gave
system.
a lot of new spells to people, and it gave a lot of this and a lot of that. And nobody was like, oh, they're, you know, but now we are. And I think it's because they're using the words feats and stuff. So I wanted to kind of talk about that. But yeah, so you get 15 additional spells compared to a regular sorcerer as you level. So a 20th level sorcerer PHB and a 20th level Dragonlance sorcerer, that one's going to have 15 more spell options to cast during whatever, which is crazy to think of. You get like your Sacred Flame cantrip actually divides into two, and you can kind of use it like Acid Splash, where if two creatures are next to each other, it'll hit both of them. But it does more damage. And then there's a lot of meta magic stuff that's kind of, you can spend points to do extra stuff. I don't know. Subtle spell, yeah. Anyway, I don't know if you got a chance to look at any of this. It's kind of cool. I think it looks like a fun class to play, like the Lunar Sorcerer. I'm really curious about the phases of the moon unlock different things, and how you would track that. I want to see the rules for tracking the moon. Like, is it every like long rest you just tick it up or something? And then do we start getting players who are like, well, I'm going to take exactly 5 long rests so that I can get into the right phase for whatever combat we're going to do?
Well, there are plenty of campaigns, and actually I think it was quite popular in the past. Maybe I haven't seen it as much recently, but the calendar of the days and knowing what day of a year that you're in the calendar of the month, so that you kind of knew the weather and like what was going on in the world around you, was tracked quite a bit. I feel like in a lot of my earlier campaigns, and even campaigns I run, I track it just because I need to know where were they that on this day of this calendar that's for this world that we're using or whatever. So I would imagine that then if you have a calendar, it tracks days, then you could track your lunar cycles, I would assume.
Yeah.
Who has the Dragonlance lunar cycle? Because they have more than one moon? Do they have
3 moons?
You know, there you go. So what's the cycle here?
And
somebody must have figured that out.
Magic comes from the moons, and so that's another interesting thing. So that's kind of why the Lunar Sorcerer makes sense, because depending on which phase of the moon is you know, if they have a white, red, and black moon, you know, your magic shifts and changes just based on that, which I thought was a really cool thing. Like, if I was creating a world, cool. I would love that, where it's like, oh no, your magic comes from that giant red thing in the sky, and if it goes behind the sun, you don't have magic for a day or something.
Yeah.
You know, and I was like, oh, or if like you're on the wrong side of the planet, like I thought that was kind of a cool, and I don't know if that's how it actually is in the books, but in my mind, I like the idea of like, you know, because how often in games do you have like, oh, there's an eclipse happening, and that eclipse causes like something major like to happen, like a gate to hell is opening up or blah blah blah. But for like, here's the period of like a day where all magic ceases to work. Like that would be so catastrophic, and you would build your entire society around that day so that your floating cities don't crash, you know,
Well, even not too long ago, we just had that really bright full moon. I think it was just a couple of weeks ago or so, and I was out taking pictures with my, you know, trying to get my phone to take good pictures of it because it was so cool. I think you could even feel it, and I don't mean like in some weird way, but just like when it's that bright and it's that shedding that much moonlight, which is a different light, I think, onto us at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're outside, you just feel like something's different. You feel like there's that's in our world, let alone one that is truly actually magical, or you know, having something to do with the phases. And you know, if the moon pulls our oceans and creates our tides and creates weather and affects those things, why wouldn't it mess with the weave of magic and the strengths of people's pull from maybe their links to gods or whatever they might have, when that does truly exist? So I think it's a cool idea. I didn't read this. They also released the one on the Knights of Solmia. There's a video out on their channel about that one too, so that they were talking about if you want to play, you know, that too. So there's definitely been some good Dragonlance stuff out there. I think it's interesting. I think it sounds very thematically cool. I think it would be something as a player I would like to play. A min-maxer probably hates it because they hate when their stuff shifts and it's random, or they're not as powerful on one thing when the other. You know, they always want their power all the time. But
and I think the min-maxer looks at that and says, well, now I have to always play this. because like if I ever play another sorcerer, I'll know that I'm not as powerful. And not I guess I bring up Ted a lot, but it's because we talk a lot. We're doing a lot of games,
and he's a min-maxer.
But we did that level 20 Vecna one shot, and I built my PHB flame sorcerer, and he was like, so just so you know, like I tweaked like the original sorcerer so that they have the same amount of spells as like the aberrant or the clockwork sorcerer that they updated later. And I was like, oh, I don't even know that. Like I just wanted flame spells, and so I took them. And it was just kind of one of those funny things where I'm like, yeah, I just took a bunch of flame spells because that's what I like. I don't know. And so I like themed stuff like this, and so I look at this and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. That's like awesome themed. But I'm sure, yeah, if you're the kind of person where you're like, well, I wouldn't want to play that flame sorcerer that Jordan built because I know that I'm missing 15 spells. Like, think about how much cooler I could be with 15 spells, and 15 is a lot. That's a lot of extra magic that you could be throwing around because we don't have, you know, like I'm thinking about AD&D rules and earlier where it's like a wizard would slot in like, here are my 3 castings of mage armor for the day. And now it's like, if I could just have this, you know, vast array of magic at my fingertips.
Yeah. I think we're moving a little bit towards that too, wouldn't you think, just from a game design perspective? Because I always thought a weird dynamic of the class-based system, magic user versus fighters, and you're building a system where your players are going to play. The fighters' abilities never wane, right? There's no countdown clock of you only have 3 more cleaves. You only have this, you know. You're getting your 2 attacks, you're getting your rolls, you're getting your thing because you have action, you have bonus action, you have reaction. You built your character around that. And it's like consistent, turn after turn after turn. Unless a creature stops you, you're doing these things. But the magic users, the sorcerers, the warlocks, they're looking at it like, there goes my 5th level spell.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm out of those. Now I'm at 4th level spells. Oh no, I'm almost out of those. Now I'm down to just cantrips and maybe some first level. Should I save some spells, you know? They have a different dynamic that they're playing. So I know it's good that players have different dynamics that they're dealing with, but I find it interesting that there's no like countdown clock for the warrior either, or a countdown clock for the thief, or, you know, you can only do this so many times till your stamina is out, or, you know, you have just exhausted yourself because you've blown all your big abilities and you've used up all of your energy, just like our, you know, big caster kind of people. But
yeah, I'm wondering if we'll see a shift because if you think about it, like the fighter does have superiority dice, and then those are gone. You know, some. Yeah, you're right. Not every fighter is like that, but that's a subclass. The bard has bardic inspiration that it can use, but it loses those and it has to gain them back. But you're right. If the rogue was like, oh, I have to spend my sneak attack die or something, and he can only do 4
backstabs.
4 backstabs, and that's it. You're right. We don't see that. Yeah. There is a big push though lately to have proficiency bonus times a day, and I wonder if the 1 D&D, which we were talking the other day, let's call one. Can we collectively call 1 D&D 5.5? Because I don't want to call it 5.5. I want to call it 5.5 because I think it's funny.
I want to call it 6th edition, but yeah.
So D&D 5.5 or 1 D&D. I'm wondering if that's what they'll do, because that was a problem in AD&D. Is like, yeah, you're right. The fighter doesn't have these resources that go down, but then at the same time, there's no reason to play a 20th level fighter over a 20th level wizard. Like the wizard could do so many cool, awesome things, and then the fighter would go up and hit something. Yeah. And so with 4th edition, they tried to make everything like that, and that's why you had encounter abilities and daily abilities.
Right.
And so the fighter would have his daily ability that did a big sword slash that he could only use once. Then at the same time, the wizard had his daily ability of doing a fireball that he could only do once. And I don't know. I often think there's a reason where people are like, I want this to be balanced, and I see that reason. But then I always look at it, I'm like, but when we give you balance, I don't think you like it anymore.
Well, yeah. Well, then what happens is you get it, but then you're like, well,
now we're all the
feel
same.
Like them. Well, now I'm not special in some way.
Exactly.
Right. So what do you
I'm
want?
like, I don't think you want it to be that way.
I want to be special, Jordan, and I want to be balanced. Give me that game right now.
You see the same problem in I know you've been playing a lot of World of Warcraft. And the forums for World of Warcraft, where it's like, why can't rogues do this? And it's like, it's because you like playing that and you want to feel powerful. But if we literally made everybody the same, then you would be upset that you're not special, you know?
And comes on and say, why can they do my ability? That's
so it's
why
kind
can
of
they
like,
backstab? Yeah.
If you want to play a fighter, we got to think about what do you like about being a fighter? And it sounds like you're like, well, I want to have these fighter slots that I can do cool things about. And it's like, well, then just play a Hexblade Warlock. Like, you'll have more fun, you know? So I don't know. I think a little imbalance is important in order to make the game interesting.
I'm coming at it from the different angle of, I feel bad for the Magic users, because I think it would be cool if you got to use your signature abilities as much as the signature Barbarian got to use their signature abilities in the fighters and stuff. But
he can only rage like 3 times. I don't know.
Yeah, there's that weird thing of it's a couple more that you have to get deeper, because it's not a simple question too, right? It's the idea of burst damage versus sustained damage in a fight. It's the difference between how long do fights last. If fights were lasting for an hour, everybody's exhausted and everybody's used up all their stuff. But if fights only last 4 rounds, things are very different, because you're talking about what each one's 6 seconds. So we're talking about 24 seconds of stuff has happened and this weird kind of thing, and that makes sense. And then how many rests do you get to, and when do we want to rest? And the reason I even was thinking about it, because you said that comment of, well, maybe we'll wait 4 lunar cycles and then we'll go. Let's rest now for 4 lunar cycles.
Yeah.
And then my big spell comes out and I'm ready to go. Well, if this is a life or death situation, you might actually do that. You might make your plan based on, we're going to do this in a month, because that's when we can do this thing that's going to give us the most possibility of succeeding, because we could die in this thing. But as a game, we just want to play tonight, right? We don't want to wait for that kind of thing.
And everything has its place, I guess is what you're saying. I do want to point out that Bill Roundy said that the Lunar Sorcerer can change the phase. They don't have to track the calendar. So, but that being said, I want to go back to what you were saying, where it's like, oh, I want to wait till the moon is right in order for this attack. I played in a game where we used ley lines. And so it was like, I want to pull the monster or the big bad guy. I want to lure him over this like magical ground, because I will be doing 10 times more damage or something. Yeah. And same thing, it made me think of Avatar: The Last Airbender, where there's like a meteor coming, spoilers or something. And so all the Fire Nation people that have firebending are like amped to 11. And that is when they have chosen to like march forth and attack, because they are at an advantage. And so I thought that was really cool too. So having those things in your world, like the eclipse that only happens every so often, and then having players use it to their advantage, I'm all about that. Like, I think that's really cool. Yeah. But you're right. I wouldn't want casual play where they're like, okay, well, we need to make 10. We gotta wait 10 things, and so I can do my cool thing. That's probably not as fun.
So, very interesting. I think if I were to play in Dragonlance, Lunar Dragon, just because the name of it, Lunar Dragon Sorcerer, just sounds cool. I would maybe try it out. It's a cool sorcerer class. Or the Knights of Solamnia. I mean, that makes sense, because I like to do that medieval knight type character, so I think I would play that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Knights of Solamnia. We talked about it, that the Knights of Solamnia and the Mages of High Sorcery were the 2 factions that were created during the like War of the Lands, helped fight in it during the Cataclysm, I guess. And again, my Dragonlance lore is spotty at best.
Mine's super weak, yeah.
It looks like I could join the Knights as any class really, because it's feat based. So you take this feat, and then you are part of the Knights, and then that feat kind of levels up with you.
Order of the Crown, Order of the Rose,
yeah. Knights of the Crown, Knights of the Sword, Knights of the Rose.
Knights,
and then based on that, it's like, okay, like one of them, Knights of the Rose follow the god Paladine, and Knights of the Sword are courageous and heroic. And I don't think
They
we
said
have a
more
lot
like
of information on what it gives you, maybe?
the terms were more like the ones that were martial, the ones that were more about fighting and on the front line and that kind of thing would be your Knights of the Sword. But there are other ones that were more about leadership or more about the piety of, and worshiping of the gods, and that would be the other ones. So that's how it does lend itself to say, well, if I am a cleric, but yet I'm in this knight order, that makes sense because their knights aren't just knights that are, we have a sword, we have this or that. It's based on these ones are fighting ones, these ones are command ones, these ones are
and the feats kind of
support, healing, and that kind of thing ones. Yeah. What I thought was interesting about it, and I don't know the lore behind it that much, but apparently what's happened at the very end of the war, when this thing's about to kick off, or at the end, the knights fail to stop the big bad guy. And everybody, so where this timeline picks up for this book is that these people were super courageous heroes during the whole War of the Lance, but now have this reputation of they didn't get it finished. They didn't get it done. So lots of people actually don't like them as we go into where this campaign's kicking off, that they failed. They weren't able to do the thing that they needed to do in some ways. So you're kind of going into, basically, if you play that, something that has a drawback as far as the community or the factions in the world that you're living in have. So I think it's kind of like if you were playing Zentarum in Forgotten Realms in a way, because Zentarum has this iconic thing. If somebody knows you're part of Zentarum, they automatically put on you, oh, you're conniving, there's you're
a relationship,
double dealing. I may not be able to trust you. And no matter if they're doing things for good in the end, it's their methods that lots of people have a problem with in the Zentarum. Or even, the Harpers. If the Harpers were great at one point, but then they failed at something massive and big, and now everybody's like, who cares about the Harpers, because they weren't there when we really needed them at the end, type thing. So it's like, that sounds to me like an interesting character arc to go through if you're dungeon master and you are kind of in sync with exploring a little bit of that, not overtaking the whole campaign or anything, but just having little areas where that can be explored a little bit. I would find interesting.
Yeah.
From a character's perspective.
And then the Mages of High Sorcery have the 3 factions as well. Only it's very like law, neutrality, chaos is what it felt like. But the white robes are, you're trying to make the world a better place, and they talk about
it's white, blue, and red.
White, red, and black.
Red, white, and black. I thought there was.
Those are the 3 moons. So white robes, they're like, this would be good for celestial warlocks, divine soul sorcerers, good aligned wizards. And then red robe is you're neutral, and you're trying to just like you're studying magic for the sake of personal power. And they don't really recommend like
letting people play the black mage.
Well, they don't recommend any classes for the red robe, so it's kind of like, I guess you could just play anything. And then Order of the Black Robes is like you have a thirst for power and a lack of morals. And it's like, this would be like Great Old One warlocks, Undying warlocks, necromantic wizards, and stuff like that. But going back to what you said, the red robes of the Mage of High Sorcery, like, you wear red as you walk around. So people look at you and they're like, oh, we've talked about this with like the Wizards of Thay that wear red and have shaved heads. They do that specifically so they will be recognized.
Yes,
because there's a
have a rep.
Yeah. A preconceived notion of like how powerful and scary you are, and so you walk around and like, oh my gosh, it's built.
You're using a stereotype to your advantage, right? Yeah. You're building a stereotype to use it for a reason.
Yeah, and I think with your example with the Zentarum, that's similar. Like, if you want to be known as a Zentarum, you're doing it intentionally so that people will fear you and what have you. So it's kind of interesting. I think it's cool. We'll see, but it kind of goes back to what about the piety system. So I was thinking about this morning. We have Dragonlance, and if we want to keep it isolated as not power creep, I feel like a lot of these abilities could be used in a different word other than feat. Because the minute you say that it's a feat, I think a lot of people will look at it and be like, oh, that's a feat I can take. but nobody looks at like, oh, that's a piety I can take, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to follow that piety. Well, no, that's a Theros thing. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And we're playing here. But now it's like, well, I'm going to take this feat. And they're like, and they did the same thing with Strixhaven, where I'm like, maybe you should have called it not a feat. Like, we should have called it something else. And this goes back to, I've been playing a lot of Magic the Gathering. And Magic does this all the time, where you have two very similar things. Like, I can't think of what off the top of my head. Like, I'm going to convive and I'm going to do this or whatever. And it's all about like drawing a card or something. But they have different names, so they interact differently mechanically. And you can't do certain things with, whatever. And so when a card specifically says this, it doesn't mean this. And looking at D&D, and I keep going back to that piety system, the piety system was very overpowered. Like, you got all kinds of magic spells, you got all kinds of like advantages and things, extra hit points, like God's power channeling through you. But we never once called that power creep because it felt isolated to that setting. And yet with Dragonlance, we're not keeping it isolated to the setting. I don't know. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think
is that good or bad, or is it good to have it like all options are open?
Yeah, I think it could be. I think you're right. There's a terminology thing there that invites more maybe argument or discussion because the way they're viewing it, and not when really the two things are the same. They're both apples. Yeah. But you're calling your an apple and I'm calling mine an orange when really they're actually both apples. But yeah, I think you're right in that. And I think I don't know, because if you do feed, it does have that connotation in D&D to be a specific thing, so maybe they should get away from that word, because other keywords was another way games have done this kind of stuff. You have a keyword that lets you do something and that means a specific thing. I know Pathfinder has a little bit of that too, but they have their big feat list also. Well, and you're taking feats, lots of feats.
I think
in
feats
that.
are
Nobody's
different in that power game. Like Pathfinder, you are supposed to take feats.
Yeah, and I think we're moving towards that.
We are.
I think we're moving more towards a Pathfinder almost version of that. Not that they coined it or anything, but just that's what it is now. And I'm not sure I'm hearing the same thing on the Pathfinder communities about, power creep from all these feats that are coming out in all these books and the books of the dead. Look at all these feats that came out. Now there's this huge power creep. They're not looking at it that way. Whereas for some reason, you are correct. I believe that the Dungeons and Dragons community, vocal community on Twitter and wherever, they're looking at it that way for some reason.
And I will also say I am in the boat that I do think it is. Like, if I took a level 1 or a 2014 PHB barbarian versus whatever other class in 2022, you're going to be underpowered,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and underpowered isn't, I don't think, right. I could say you could compare differently, but you have no idea what power you are to the campaign that your dungeon master is running. You may be underpowered. You might be overpowered. It depends what the dungeon master is doing with the campaign. What are they throwing at you? What bonuses are they adding to things? How are they deciding their CR creature table stuff? Because nobody really uses the way it is in the book. Everybody has to have their own way of coming up with it because it just doesn't seem to fit that party. So I don't even think you can say that, because that's the other thing that's so disingenuous about the argument, is that everybody's campaign is so different. Your world would be so different than mine. And maybe there's a character that if I put it in your campaign of the Rod of the Seven Parts, people go, oh my God, look how powerful that is. But then they came over and played in my, Seeking Ravnica, and they'd be like super underpowered and not working right or something, just because of the way the campaign is running and the things we do in those campaigns doesn't align to make you more or less powerful. So it's a weird thing to say we're powered or we're balanced or we're underpowered when we don't even know the play field that we're on, because the play field is never the same. It's not a soccer game. All the posts are the same. The length of the field is the same. The rules are the same. It's not like that at all. Everything's different and everything can change no matter where you're playing.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a weird
and so, yeah, I don't know.
Thing to throw your, build your hill on. Like, I'm going to die on this hill.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, so I guess that was my big point, is like, if we're shifting to playing in specific settings, and let's say Dragonlance is a setting that you are supposed to be supercharged, sure. Like you are a hero among heroes, but then you're going to play I don't know, I always bring up Dark Sun, where it's like you're struggling to get by.
Yeah, you're a dirt farmer.
I'm not necessarily going to take Dragonlance mechanics to make my Dark Sun campaign feel more Dark Sun, you know? Or I'll use Ravenloft. Like, I'm not going to use Dragonlance mechanics to make my Ravenloft characters just super, because that eliminates the dread that I'm trying to do. So why don't we use keywords that really tie it to a setting? Which is something that we could think of in the future. I don't know. Who knows? And maybe Wizards is thinking about that right now. I don't know. But I like that idea. Like, give players more stuff to do, but maybe don't make it so broad that it overlaps with other settings. Who knows? So.
But I guess with the introduction of Spelljammer, it is possible that my person jumps on a spell jamming ship and goes to the planet Kryn.
Yeah.
It's really my Forgotten Realms, you know,
well, and then you land
monster.
And you take the test to be a knight and you get the power. I don't know. Like, that's an adventure, though. Yeah. That's cool. That's not
we've
like...
tied that world together.
If that's your backstory, we're like, yeah, I'm level 2, but I traveled from Forgotten Realms to Kryn, and I took this, and I became the hero there, and then I flew back, and I've got this badass
But then I went to Theros through spell jamming. Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's interesting, though, and I was even thinking, like we have the boon system, like epic boons. Like, you could have made this Dragonlance using that. Like, at level 1, you get this boon for being part of the night. And then it's not tied to the word feat. Yeah. But I agree with you. I think D&D 5.5, 5e, is shifting to specifically a feat-based kind of options.
Heavier,
where we're going to have more options, and one D&D is going to have more feats and things like that. And so this is the... testing jumping off point, you know?
And flavored feats, right?
Yes.
And less generic, trying to make it fit for all. It's more of these flavored, it's specific to some type of origin or place or training or thing you've done or group you've joined type thing. And then here's why and what it does. So I think that's where we're headed for sure.
Yeah. Which is kind of cool, because it's always weird when you hit level 4 and you're like, I'm just really good at sneaking now. And it's like, but how did you get, you know?
It was yesterday you weren't.
Yeah. What?
How'd that work? Maybe what it really should be, they should just do a better job of saying all of these things, all of the books are optional rules, right? Because that is true. Any book that's extra from the first 3 are optional rules. And maybe the other part of that should be, and all optional rules tend to be more powerful. So if you're adding these things to your games, you are intentionally adding power to your games, and you've accepted that contract of adding power to your games because you know adding these optional things are powerful. We're not creating books of underpowered options, right? Nobody's buying that book. Nobody's creating a book. Everything they put out that's an optional rule is going to be more powerful than the base, I think. Maybe that's where we got to start the conversation from.
We can't solve everyone's problems, Lucian.
But we're going to try one day at a time, one show at a time. No,
we can talk about how to run one-shots for Halloween.
We can do that.
So Halloween is upon us. This was a good question. Just like, how do you run one-shots for Halloween? And I usually take a Ravenloft approach where whatever we're doing, it's like, oh, we got to do like a Halloween episode. And it's like, you guys mysteriously walk through a veil or you find a haunted house or something, and then I'll run some kind of adventure there. And with that in mind, I'm curious how your Mist game did, because you said you rolled up new characters for that?
Yeah, so it was a one-shot. They knew it was a one-shot. And I kind of told them just that, you know, I wanted them to create characters that just had a couple of levels, but they were a type of, and this is how I kind of tried to lead it up, because in a Halloween game, I'm trying to build some type of mystery, some type of atmosphere, because I think a Halloween game, what you're really saying is, how do I build an atmospheric game, right? How do I get a little scariness, or how do I get a little tension? How do I get a little of that suspense in my games? And so what I tried to do to set it up was say, you know, you have a couple of levels in whatever classes you guys have picked, but you've mostly stayed around this town. You haven't really ventured far. This is the area you've lived in all your lives. You know each other. You know the townspeople. You've adventured to a few places here or there. That's how you've got your levels. You know, you're making some gold or whatever here. But That's it. You're not like world travelers. You're not, globe trotting super wizards or anything like that. And then that's how we're going to start, this session. And then so what I wanted to do is, one, try to give them a tie to the community I was going to mess with a little bit, and make them, or give them a reason that they would care. Because, you're trying to overcome a couple of things. One, all of us have watched a million Halloween movies, so we're all ready for our dungeon master to throw something at us. We're like, oh, I saw that coming. And two, how do we care about something if it's not a one shot, right? Because a lot of times people might play a little bit differently than they would in their main campaign, because they know, it's just a one-off, so I'll just kind of be
they don't
goofy,
take it as seriously, so
I won't make real decisions, and I don't want it to be too heavy one way or the other. But I'm trying to add an atmosphere. How do I try to add spookiness? How do I try to add suspense so that they don't quite get it? They know something's going to happen, but they don't know when and how. So I tried to set up that, and then I messed with the rules of physics a little bit as they knew it. So that was the other thing that allowed me to put the mystery in the game, because all of a sudden, one thing that makes very spooky D&D games is when their vision is brought down to, say, only about 10 feet out. If that just happens and there's nothing they can do, no tremor senses working, no dark vision, no holding my torch up mattered. This mist covered everything, couldn't be blown away, couldn't be gotten rid of, and you could only see about 10 feet. But things are happening in the distance, and things are happening around you, and you can hear things are happening, and spooky sounds and screams, and you're trying to figure out what to do, and you can't quite recognize things as you go. That's how I tried to play around a little bit with my game. You can't do that in all of them. You have to come up with different reasons for different ones, but I tried to do two things. Add suspense and mystery to the game, add tension, and then play around with atmospherics and the physics of what's going on, so that they had a different experience than their normal adventuring experience. Because all of a sudden, all your tactics and plans that you've been using throughout all your campaign, even if they had used characters they'd had for a year in a campaign, if all of a sudden your vision's down to 10 feet, or this thing is, you're underwater and this makes you do a certain thing, that really messes with their dynamics. It makes them think, makes them come up with different plans and different ways to play.
So I like that a lot too. And for one-shots especially, if your players are familiar with D&D 5e, I can't find it. I was searching frantically while Lucian was doing it. But I know that on the DMsGuild, somebody made a game, a horror Halloween kind of one-shot, but the player characters were commoners. So he took the monster, like, basic human stat block, and then put it in there. And it's kind of a fun thing because you're very weak, but your players will understand that I roll a d20 and I add my strength, which is -1. And you're like, wait, what? So if you want to do a one shot like that, where they understand, I think you could do a basic haunted house, and it's like, my weapon doesn't hurt this thing, and they have to like run through the house to find like a silver fork or something to attack the ghost or the vampire. That could be a lot of fun, because your players will understand the mechanics, but they will be frightened at how underpowered they are for whatever kind of like basic situation they're getting into. It might actually make them like really enjoy the idea of their powered characters later on, like their regular D&D characters, because they're like, oh man, we couldn't even heal, like that's kind of spooky. And I've talked about this before. I really need to find it, because I thought it was a cool idea of using the OGL to be like, you're going to play monsters, but these monsters are, just regular humans. And I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, because you can get stat blocks of just people.
Like, that's the thing.
Of different
and that's
stuff.
what it was.
Yeah.
Like, you're just going to play this person. And I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. So for Halloween one-shots, I do it two ways. Like, usually one-shots, I do a different system, because if I'm going to play a one-shot, I want to play a different system. But for Halloween in the past, during my campaign, I've done things like where they stumbled upon, I try to make it funny most of my games, but also Halloween themed. So there was one year where my players stumbled upon a village where, as the sun was going down, the people in houses were throwing all the kids out into the street. And they're like, why are they doing that? And then when the sun finally went down, all the kids turned into monsters. And the players were just like, do we attack these monsters? I'm like, they were kids. And so they were like, I don't know what to do. And that was another funny thing, or interesting because it wasn't like, oh, I see a bad guy, I have to defeat it. They needed to figure out what was causing this to happen. And it turned out that it was a giant pumpkin monster in the pumpkin pouch out back that was magically changing all the kids at night. And so we had trick-or-treating in the sense that the monsters were knocking on the door trying to get into the house, and we had costumes, which were the kids changing into monsters. And then when they defeated the giant pumpkin, magic candy shot everywhere, kind of like a piñata. And then I had a random table of what the magic candy did, which would give them, they could hold on to that magic item, and then if they ate it, they would get like advantage for a minute or something like that. And it was kind of fun. I've also done where you've like been washed away into another world, and it's kind of like, what's happening here? And that was a similar one where they had to figure out what it was. And I used stock monsters. So there was like the Frankenstein house up the hill, there was like the vampire house down there was the mummy house over there, and your players can kind of choose like, are we like in a weird Halloween town kind of a thing? That game was really fun because I ended up killing one of my players. And then I handed him this is DM Nathan. I killed Nathan's character. And then I handed him a ghost monster stat block. And he got to play as a ghost for the rest of the game. And he even possessed another monster and got to play that monster. So it can really open up new ideas where you're like, oh, I didn't know I could do this, And so, and then that one was so tropey and fun, but part of me likes that. I think it's, a lot of people are like, I want to go fight Dracula. Let's do it. Like, I want to go fight the Wolfman in the forest, and it's kind of fun. They know what's happening, but like you were saying, like we watch horror movies kind of like what's going to happen. You're going to get a jump scare, and part of the fun is knowing. Like I'm not actually trying to scare anyone at my table. Usually we're just trying to have a fun time. But for you should do Monster Squad the game, where you have the Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, they all like come out to attack or something. That would be so fun.
One of my favorite book series is Monster Hunters Internationals, and it really is all about all the classic monsters that you would think of and that people are out there having to deal with them. I would think also one other tip, this is a great time to dive into the undead portion of the monster manuals and all the books that are out there, because it's interesting to see what ghosts and ghasts and incorporeal creatures can do. What can the ghouls and the zombies and the thing, where you're really exploring the wide range gambit of and this type of vampire or a dampier or a this or a that. And there's all these undead things out there that you can play around with that they might not know or have got to play against. In Ravnica, my group ran into a ghost at one point, and it possessed a player, and the player started attacking the party, and that became a whole thing, and I let the player just do all that and just, go attack your party. Like, here you go, you're a ghost now, attack your party, and just let them go crazy, until they could get the ghost out. And then if you do enough damage, it would eject the ghost out of the body, and it would do its thing and would try to get into somebody else. So it was like it was trying to constantly get back into somebody until they could finally contain it, corral it, and destroy it. That could be a really fun kind of gambit too. So I think lean into a lot of those undead resources that you have for different types of skeletons and zombies and ghosts and ghasts and burning skulls and liches. And I mean, there's so many different types of things that are undead that it's cool. An undead troll.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Okay. I just had a great idea. So you start out kids on bikes.
Ooh, I like
your kids.
We're in the 80s.
We're playing kids on bikes. It's the 80s. Your players are playing kids. They go to the movies to watch a horror movie.
Makes sense.
Then you take their character sheets away and you give them the character sheets of the people in the movie. And then they play against the monsters. But when they find the monsters jump out of the movie. And then you have to go back to kids on bikes. And so they have the knowledge of what they did against the monsters earlier. But now they're like severely underpowered. Like, wait, what? That could be a lot of fun. I don't know. There's lots of cool Halloween ideas.
Yeah,
I think
you're right.
It starts off Halloween is the perfect let's have a themed game. And I always feel like it starts off like that. Let's do a Halloween one. And then you're like, well, let's do a let's do a Thanksgiving one and let's do a Christmas one and stuff. So, and then I like to do those DCC Christmas one shots. Those are really fun too.
Hey guys, you're all on a bus and you're passing a sign on the right and it says Crystal Lake. Welcome to the
yeah, exactly. Oh, I would love it. Hilarious. That would be so fun.
No. Hey, you guys are on Elm Street. Have you been on Elm Street?
It's weird.
Before? This is
you guys
weird.
Getting sleepy. No, I like it a lot. So I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
As far as games, I played my DCC game in Hot Springs Island, and our players are having a great time. It makes me so happy that they just like love that system, that game. They're having so much fun with it. I'm getting to run DCC much more than before, and I'm learning new things that I didn't think about. Like, we had one player who is the thief, and she wanted to pick a lock, but she failed. And another player was like, well, can I do it? And I'm like, I mean, I don't want to stop you, but like, you're not good at this, so you can try it with a D10 instead of a D20. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh. And just saying that made them be like, I guess I'm not good at this, you know? Rather than like a 20 succeeds all the time kind of a thing. Like, in a weird way, he could potentially like pick the lock if it's a really low DC, but he's never going to pick it if it's a DC 17, you know? And I thought that was kind of fun. So using the dice chain has been interesting to incorporate that more into my game. Having lots of fun with that. We're having loads of fun with the Mighty Deeds mechanic. Now, when you've played DCC, did you play the Mighty Deeds mechanic? So warriors have something called a Mighty Deed, where when they attack, they roll like a D4, and then if that D4 lands on a 4, you get to do something cool. And so usually it's like, I want to trip the monster and knock him prone, or I want to like throw dust in his eye and make him blind for a round, or even like I want to shove him out of the way. It's kind of all of that fun stuff you can do as a fighter, but it's so generic that it's like, well, you can, whatever you think of, if you hit that 4, you can do it. But I need to know ahead of time what you're trying to do. Like, are you trying to disarm the guy? Are you trying to do this? Are you trying to pull your friend to safety? And I have 2 warriors, and they've been very creative in like, well, my friend's grappled. I want to like stab him and have him like drop my friend. And I'm like, that's great. If you roll this on your D die, I will let that happen. And then we know that it's like, oh, okay. So he not only has to hit the monster, he has to get that 4 on the D die. And it's been a lot of fun. And I think that's a really great mechanic that 5e does not have. Yet if you look at like the fighter with the superiority dice, they're trying to emulate that, but make it way more complicated. And I look at this and I'm just like, I don't know, you could have just been an easy deed die to be like, whatever. But in a way it works for DCC because it's, it wouldn't work for 5e because 5e is not that simple. By design, it wants to be more complex, whereas this is kind of like, yeah.
Numenera has that too with its conditions, because if you roll a certain way, you're able to add a condition onto something, or like a trip or a 1-round stun kind of thing.
Yeah.
On top of, you get some extra damage or you get some extra whatever. And so, I always like that idea. It's that when you're doing those 2d6 games, the Powered by the Apocalypse, you'll run a lot of that kind of stuff too, with how well are you succeeding, how well are you failing type thing. Story driven success, story driven failure type thing. It's been
really fun, and I mean we don't have poisons yet, but I was just thinking like, if I was playing this, I'd be like, oh, I want to like pour poison on my blade. I'm like, well, you'll do an extra 5 damage if you hit your D die, kind of a thing. Or like, I'll give him the poison condition if you hit your D die. And it just makes everything so much simpler from my end, because they usually want to do crazy things. And then I'm like, well, let's see if you can do it with the D die, And then with other players, I usually say like if you want to do something crazy and acrobatic like that, it's either going to be 2 checks or I need you to spend some luck or something to make it happen. And so for the thief, that's really cool, because the thief's luck generates back. So the thief is like, oh, I'll do this and for extra damage and extra other stuff. It's kind of fun.
Have you really compared like your difference of, because you've ran Hot Springs Island as a 5e game.
Yeah.
And now you're running a Hot Springs Island as a DCC game. can you compare them because it's two different systems, but you're using the same island? Or is Hot Springs Island not a good way to compare because you could run two 5e games in Hot Springs Island? They could be very different and very not the same.
I think I have been comparing them, which is kind of one of the reasons I wanted to run Hot Springs Island again. I love it, but I think it's and I think it works better for Dungeon Crawl Classics simply because with 5e my players were like, "Oh, monsters to fight," and they'd run in and fight them, and it took them a little bit, one character death, it took them a while to realize maybe we don't fight everything
we see.
Whereas in DCC they've been from the very beginning, they're kind of like, I've only got 12 hit points, like what are we doing here, guys? And so a lot of times they try to avoid attacks, they try to talk to people, they're actually getting more of the story, I think, because they're exploring and investigating. And that's not players being different. I think the 5e just encourages you to play a different way,
Yeah, if you give me a cleave ability, I'm looking for things to cleave.
Exactly. Yeah.
You gave me a fireball. I want to fireball something, Jordan.
Yeah. But so I don't know. We're just having a really good time. So we're going to play again on November 6th. We're doing it every 2 weeks, I think. It'll be fun. So, and it's just been really fun to play Dungeon Crawl Classics. And then speaking of Dungeon Crawl Classics, I have a couple Kickstarters coming in. So, the Something of the Devil Lich, which is like a really difficult dungeon that they had back in the day. I got a 5e version and a DCC version coming in the mail. Nice. DCC 100 is coming in the mail soon. And DCC The Dying Earth is coming in the mail soon. So I'll be around Christmas, I think I'll have lots of stuff that I want to run. So
it's funny you're buying lots of those because I keep buying lots of 5e stuff. Like stuff
those were all Kickstarters.
Wouldn't normally be
like
5e, but
a year ago. But they're coming in. So.
Like that's what I'm backing. Like, oh, I want to do this Secret World. It's a 5e version of the Secret World. Oh, I want to do this Everyday Heroes. It's a 5e version of it. Or whatever it might be. I was like, I'm leaning towards more. I want to use the 5e rule set, but I'm using it for things that it wasn't necessarily designed for. But I think fun. Just because it's easy, 5e is just ingrained in my head. I know I can pick a game up immediately without a lot of prep. Whereas when you're learning other systems, I'm still reading through Pathfinder, I'm still reading through some other systems. It takes a while to get those in your head down pat, right? So I'm sure right now you're probably feeling really good about DCC because you're not probably having to look up as much stuff as you maybe
exactly. And you have those stumbling blocks, but I feel like I could run it so much better now that I have in the past. Like I think back to some of the live streams we did where I'm like, I don't really know, and now it's like, oh, and you have to play it. That's the thing. And you have those stumbling blocks, I think the next game I'm really going to focus on is Worlds Without Number. Because I've been rereading some of that, and I have a Kickstarter called The Atlas of the Latter Earth, which is by the Kevin something, I forget his name, who wrote Worlds Without Number. And this is his like campaign setting for Worlds Without Number, and I thought that was really cool. So I kind of want to flip through that and then maybe come up with an adventure. But I don't know, just lots of cool stuff. And then apparently Mothership's going to show up at some point. I'm going to want to play that. And we have the Pangea PDF, but when that physical book hits, I really want to run a Pangea game. Like,
I just saw an email for those of you that have backed in that. I think he just put out an interactive character sheet. So if you want to download a character sheet, I think it's a PDF that has
for Pangea?
Does the math or does the stuff on it, has drop downs and stuff to make it easier to do character creation, I think.
Now I'm looking at my Kickstarters, but also Kids on Bike 2nd edition is up if you guys are interested in that. Cool. And then there was another Kickstarter called Home, the Haunted House Map Building RPG. And this won't be delivered until next year. But it looked like a really fun, kind of like Alice is Missing, where you play it like once or twice with a group of people, but you build a haunted house together as you're exploring it. And what a cool way to maybe I don't know, they're not claiming to do this, but in my mind I'm like, I want to create a haunted house and then like run other players through it or something. I thought that'd be kind of fun in a different system. Like it might be interesting. So
Very cool.
I don't know. There's lots of cool stuff out there, guys. Like lots of cool stuff.
So much. Yeah. I keep
Too
buying
much.
more than I could ever use or I'm going to
more
get
than
to use.
It's getting to the point where it's more than I can read. Like I got a couple of those.
I need another
Kickstarters.
bookshelf.
I need to slow down.
Yeah.
Dungeon of the Mad Mage though. Before we take off, what did you do?
Yeah, we played. We're going to change. This was our last Tuesday night. We made a group decision. We're going to move to Thursday night. So we didn't play this past Thursday, but we're going to play Thursday. So we're also going to be online with our digital dungeon master from Down Under in Australia. We're going to continue to play Dungeon of the Mad Mage. We are having lots of fun moving down. I think we're down to like level 13 or 14 right now. We're getting down to the big levels, and everything is always, it's themed, so it's like this really, each level is going to be very different, and we're still tracking where everything is, and our characters have gotten, pretty powerful at this point, so that's been fun. But we've also been meeting different factions, and then like sometimes we side with a faction, sometimes we wipe out a faction, so it's just like this weird thing. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of where this goes, how it's going to end up. Hallister still messes with us throughout the whole thing, so it's kind of like, you can really lean into that. There's the tiny inklings that we're thinking about the next campaign, though, because we know we're starting to get towards the end, and I wonder if we're going to get to that point that many of you may have been in before, where your campaign's almost done, and your brains start to kind of check out a little bit, and you're like already thinking about, well, what's my next character I want to play? What's the next world we're going to be in? What's the next cool thing we're going to be doing? Even though I still like this game and I like my character, my brain starts moving to what am I going to make next?
Here's a spoiler secret for you. I was reading through Great Modron March. The march goes through Hallister's or the Dungeon of the Mad Mage.
Yeah, we met up with a Modron once.
Yeah,
so
but
far.
I was like, how funny would it be if when my players get there, if we have like a meetup with your group and my group?
That'd be so good.
And it's like, wait, what? And yeah, there's like a brief little, like, I think it's just like a tunnel. Like these two portals is a shortcut for the Modrons, and they go through it. And there's a small little adventure in Dungeon of the Mad Mage. So
very cool.
This is the 2e version, but that dungeon's been there for a long time.
I like how Modrons show up in a lot of the big adventures, just as a small little piece, some corner, some little item, some little thing.
Yeah. People just like them. They're just fun.
Yeah, even in Tomb of Annihilation, I feel like we saw something that was Modron based at one point too, even when we were there. Obviously, there was in the one we've come across, which may not be what you're thinking of yet for the spoiler piece, but there's a Modron that's walking around several columns, and there's stone statues everywhere. And if you put something in the center of those statues, whatever was a stone statue turns back from whatever it was. So you realize these aren't stone statues that were created by stonemasons. These are things that were turned to stone. And if you put them there, they come back to life or wherever they were. We had a kick, one of our sidekicks came from that, a Kenku. There was a Kenku statue, so we moved it in there, and he comes out, and it was an adventurer that's been there forever, lost his parties, didn't know that, they'd been turned to stone type thing. And so he kicked around with us for a while. We were playtesting the sidekick rules using that. It was really fun. So we did that, but there's that Modron, and everybody there was like this group of us like, do we mess with the Modron or do we not? It was like, because what happens if we move them off course, or do you want to do that? Do you want to bring in some chance that you're going to trigger the Modron march or something worse to happen because this Modron's doing this thing? So
for
that's
sure.
pretty funny.
Oh, so fun. Games galore. Well, that's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming out and watching and hanging out with Mr. Lucian and I.
Have fun. Stay safe on your Halloween.
Have a happy Halloween. And like always, Lucian's streaming now on Thursdays. I'm streaming on Thursdays on YouTube. And you can always catch us here live on Saturday mornings where we talk about Dungeons & Dragons. We'll see you guys next week. In November. Wait, November.